On this edition of Locked On Grizzlies, we break down a tough loss at home for Memphis against the Charlotte Hornets on the back-to-back second night of a back-to-back. I'm going to make a case for Nick Richards to be a member of the Memphis Grizzlies roster this time in, 8 months or so. And I'm going to make an argument against Jake LaRavia being around. We're going to try to make some wheels and deals and get some steals here on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Lock in with me.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is a Thursday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Welcome. I am your host, Joe Mullinax, for this episode, flying solo. Once again, no DeMichael Cole with me, commercial appeals beat writer for the Memphis Grizzlies. Of course, my co-host here on Locked On Grizzlies. He's doing his beat writer thing. He'll be with us on tomorrow's episode, closing out the week here on Locked On Grizzlies. But you got me, Joe Mullinax, with you this time around. Thank you so much, wherever you are checking out the show, for being with us. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use the code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for our first deposit match up to $100. Again, we are free and available wherever you get podcasts as proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. Apple, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon, wherever you get podcasts, like, comment, rate, review, subscribe. Hopefully you are making us a part of your everyday NBA content consumption, Memphis Grizzlies content consumption. We are very happy to have everydayers. And if it's your first time around, we're happy to have you here, of course, as well, on Locked On Grizzlies. A tough loss, right? On yesterday's show, I talked about the Grizzlies standard flexing their muscle and how exciting that was, right? Look at how powerful the Grizzlies standard is. Well, it has its limits. Second night of a back-to-back, the Grizzlies had several players still out due to injury. No Vince Williams Jr., no Jaren Jackson Jr. We had an injury upgrade for Desmond Bane, right? Looking more and more likely that Desmond Bane will make his return to the lineup after a couple of months out. It'll be Brandon Clark making a season debut later this month, more than likely. But Desmond Bane making his return to the roster, active roster, on Saturday. That's probable, and we'll get more from DeMichael on tomorrow's show about that, I'm sure. But none of those guys played. No Jaren, no Bane, no Vince Williams Jr. G.G. Jackson draws the start. Scottie Pippen Jr. returns with his dad in the house. That had to be pretty cool for his dad to watch his son start in an NBA game. But the Grizzlies were pretty clearly outmatched from the beginning, whether it was energy, whether it was the fact, again, second game in 2 nights. Charlotte much more rested, had the day off yesterday, or a couple days ago, Whatever the case might be, Charlotte looked like a team that was ready to pounce. The rest of the game was played out pretty evenly between Memphis and Charlotte, but the first quarter led to a 12-point lead that the Grizzlies could not overcome. The wins and the losses aren't as important at this point, like we've talked about. The standard being on display against the Wizards doesn't mean that it wasn't on display against the Hornets because Memphis lost. That's important to understand. The standard being on display in the Hornets game, despite losing the contest, was G.G. Jackson himself continuing to show his development, his capacity to be an elite offensive player potentially in this league. We talked yesterday about G.G. cooling off a bit from three. That was not the case against Charlotte, 6 for 12 from beyond the arc. Pretty impressive, as he scored 26 points on 17 shots. G.G. is developing layers to his offensive game in particular, scoring at all 3 levels, getting to the basket better, cutting, slashing, getting there off the dribble as well. He had some impressive numbers in this contest in his 37 minutes of play, scoring the ball. No assists, no steals, no blocks, 3 turnovers. So it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, but we got to remember we're talking about the youngest player in the NBA. G.G. Jackson, if you hope he can be a bench bucket getter for this team when they're trying to compete again in 8 or 9 months, you should feel pretty good about it after what G.G. showed. And again, that development piece of this process is a part of that Grizzly standard. Luke Kennard, 4 for 8 from 3, continuing to be one of the best three-point shooters, not just in the NBA right now, but of all time. Yeah, I said it. A top 10 three-point shooter. He may not be number 1, 2, or 3, but he's 8, 9, or 10, and that makes you top 10, brother. Continuing to show his chops as a creator of offense. 3 assists. Developing a rapport with Gigi Jackson. Gigi made a big 3 in the corner off of a Luke drive and dish. That matters because those are 2 guys that likely will interact together a lot if Luke stays around long term. And those 2 guys are reserves on this team when they are, again, trying to be a championship contender in 2024, 2025. You even had John Conchar out there. Another solid performance. 13 points, 9 rebounds. Conchar has always been an elite rebounding wing. For all of my complaints about John Conchar and his carefully curated three-point attempts, shout out to Keith Parrish of Fast Break Breakfast for that. But regardless of that, again, 4 assists, 3 steals. Solid outing for Conchar. I'll even give him that. So did guys struggle like Wayne and Gabriel? Yeah. Jake LaRavia, who we're going to talk more about towards the end of the show. Did they have poor performances that helped lead to Memphis losing? Yeah, they did. But those are guys, whether they're on the roster or not on the roster, the Grizzlies are not counting on next season. The 3 names that I just mentioned, Gigi Jackson, John Conchar, Luke Kennard, in theory, those are 3 dudes that are going to be in the mix for rotation minutes on a championship contending team. So you would like to see them perform well against a squad like the Charlotte Hornets, who is not planning on being a championship contending team next season. They are still very much in their rebuilding phase, and they've got some impressive pieces to build around, right? Miles Bridges will have a fascinating offseason. Again, all the baggage that comes with him, given his domestic violence charges and all the stuff that went into that process. Can still score the basketball. That's a valuable skill. 27 points, 6 rebounds, 6 assists. Somebody's going to want to have that guy on their roster. Maybe it's the Charlotte Hornets, right? Whether it's free agency, trade, whatever the case might be, Bridges is going to be in an interesting spot. Brandon Miller, who, by the way, is 2 years older than Gigi Jackson and was outplayed by Gigi Jackson in this game, still has had a solid rookie season, probably a first-team all-rookie selection when the time comes at the end of the year, assuming he's played enough games. Terrence Mann, who Charlotte brought in as part of that trade involving the Oklahoma City Thunder. That guy can play. He was impressive. He did some solid things, and he's helping the Hornets win. Grant Williams had a solid game off the bench. The main reason, if you want to break down why the Grizzlies lost, Grant Williams scoring 18 points, getting 6 rebounds off the bench, doing far more than basically any other Grizzlies reserve did combined. That has a major hand in what occurred. The Grizzlies not being able to get back in the fight in particular. But again, beyond this individual game, what are we looking for? Tuesday night was more about the Grizzlies standard as a unit. Wednesday night was more about it shining through in the guys that are going to be dependent on when this team is once again trying to compete and contend. And if you focus on it in that direction, you probably feel pretty good. I do. Do I think Gigi Jackson can score 10 to 15 points a game as a reserve, playing 20 minutes a night for a Grizzlies team that's trying to contend for a championship? Yes, I do. I know there's some folks out there, like my old friend Matt Hardlicka, doesn't necessarily agree. They don't see it so much with Gigi, and I get it. It's hard to put that much stock in such a young player. But again, I'm not asking for him to be this well-rounded two-way dynamo. I want him to play 18 to 20 minutes a night and score 10 points off the bench consistently. Be an offensive force, or at least an offensive threat, when the likes of Ja and Bane are not playing together on the floor at the same time. Because moving forward, one of Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, or Jaren Jackson Jr. should be on the floor at all times, starting back up in October and November. One of them. It may not be realistic, injuries, all these other things that may occur, to have 2 of them, especially in the case of Ja and Bane. So Gigi Jackson being that secondary offensive weapon. If you think he can do that, you should be pretty optimistic about what you saw on Wednesday night. If you think Luke Kennard can continue to be an elite three-point shooter, you should definitely be happy about what you saw. If you think John Conchar could be an end of the rotation, end of the bench, break glass in case of emergency player like he's been throughout his time in Memphis, yeah, the Grizzlies lost. But at the same time, that improves lottery odds. And at the same time, you're still seeing production from guys that you hope to be productive when the team is actively trying to compete again. Those are all things to be optimistic about, at least for me. What about you? What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, Nick Richards did not have the strongest showing. And we've talked about Nick Richards here on Locked On Grizzlies before. Didn't look truly elite in this contest. Not going to act like he did, but I think I can make a pretty convincing case for trading for Nick Richards of the Charlotte Hornets. We're going to talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is phenomenal. It's the #1 fantasy sports app with over 3 million members, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. And it just got more fun because it is now demon time on Prize Picks. You can now win up to $100 your money with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into 1,000 demons and goblins. The newest and most exciting way to play at Prize Picks. Squares marked with red demons or green goblins get you different payouts. You can now win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Do it right now. Use the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Go there and use the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we will be discussing the argument for Nick Richards. Stick with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, one of your hosts of Locked On Grizzlies, flying solo on this episode. No DeMichael Cole this time around to the commercial appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for that publication. He's doing those beat writer things. He will be back with us for the Friday episode. I've been talking Grizzlies Hornets. We're going to move on from that game. I doubt very few people actually watched it. I did. I'm doing the dirty work for you, dear listener, dear viewer, my wonderful everydayer. I've got your back. I can provide that insight for you. And if you did watch it, bless your heart, we can commiserate in what was not the best display of basketball that probably either of us have ever seen. But before we talk about my evil plan to bring Nick Richards to Memphis, as you know, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel, Locked On Sports Today. If you're a baseball fan, you need to mark your calendar. March 20th, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, the best Major League Baseball season preview is coming exclusively to Locked On Sports Today. Be the first to get local insight from the MLB local experts of the Locked On Podcast Network. Find it again March 20th, 7 p.m. Eastern Time on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. I was texting with DeMichael, my wonderful co-host here at Locked On Grizzlies, during the game, and I'm not going to say exactly what was said because, we have a personal relationship, and I certainly don't want to take Locked On Grizzlies privilege and abuse it with the wonderful DeMichael Cole. But we agreed that it wasn't the strongest performance from Nick Richards. And if you are an everydayer here at Locked On Grizzlies, you know that we've discussed Nick Richards a few times. One of the things I like about Nick Richards, aside from his size, it's 6'11", a little bit beefier and thicker, right? One of the things I like is the reality of him having a very team-friendly contract over the next 2 seasons. After this one, he makes $5 million per season. For a team like Memphis that is going to have some money issues, having a player like that under contract for 2 years at that flat $5 million rate certainly should be an attractive piece. But again, if you were looking to be wowed, okay, Joe has been talking about this Nick Richards guy. Let's see what it's all about. You didn't come away from it thinking that I was onto something. You probably were thinking of me in less than flattering terms. Maybe a sad trombone was playing in the back of your mind. Whatever the case might be, Nick Richards did not dominate the Memphis Grizzlies. He did not dominate Trey Jemison like maybe you would have hoped. In 29 minutes of play, Richards only had 8 points. He grabbed 5 boards, a couple of blocks, which was nice to see. And that is one of the strengths of Nick Richards' game, which I'll mention here momentarily. But he wasn't some unstoppable force, especially against a guy on a two-way contract that may or may not be a part of the Memphis Grizzlies' long-term plans. That's mildly concerning. But one game does not a sample size make, and I'm going to make the argument for Nick Richards in three parts. First and foremost, when it comes to being a defensive big, if you are looking for someone who can do that for you at a high level, especially as a rim protector, Nick Richards is your guy. Across his entire career, since he has become a more prominent member of the Hornets rotation, he has posted at least a 2.4% block percentage. That is above average among NBA bigs over that 3-year span, and all of these numbers are per Cleaning the Glass. So that is a major argument. If you want a rim protector, you want someone that has length that can allow Jaren to be more of that free floater away from the basket, Nick Richards is your guy. Second major argument, in my opinion, for Nick Richards is he is an above-average rebounder. Only once, and it was a couple of years ago, was Nick Richards a below-average rebounder defensively. Every other time, whether it's offense or defense, you look at the percentages, he's in the 78th, 67th, 81st, varying percentile. Put it at on average around 72nd, right? And again, that's above average. I'm not saying he's elite. I'm saying he's above average. He checks a box. He allows for you to do those things. A number that surprised me in my research for this episode is just how impactful he is in terms of points per shot attempt. That's the total points scored per 100 shot attempts, according to Cleaning the Glass. His entire career that he has been a major piece, his rookie season, he didn't play a ton for Charlotte. Over the last 3 seasons, he has been in the 90th to 93rd on average percentile for points per shot attempt. His usage rate is usually pretty low. This season, that is still the case. Again, he only scored 8 points in the contest against the Grizzlies, but he also only took 4 shots. So he's not asked to be an offensive threat or force. He's asked to focus on defense and rebounding. And when he does score, he's usually pretty impactful and efficient in his roles and as an offensive rebounder. So he does similar things to what Steven Adams did as a rebounder, as a defender. Not quite the offensive creator that Adams was, and that would be a bit of a drop-off. But again, you're paying Steven Adams a heck of a lot more money, right? Nick Richards is at a much larger discount. And here is where I think I could win DeMichael Cole over, and here's where I think I might be able to win you over, dear listener, dear viewer. Nick Richards doesn't necessarily have to start. If you buy into the idea, and I know there are folks in the YouTube comments that don't, if you buy into the idea that the Memphis Grizzlies clearly are at least thinking about that Jaren Jackson Jr. can be a starting 5 now, if the starting 5 going into opening night in October is Joe Morant, Desmond Bane, Marcus Smart, Brandon Clark, and Jaren Jackson Jr., Nick Richards could be your backup center. Nick Richards could play alongside Santi Aldama in theory. Maybe you trade Santi Aldama, he goes somewhere else. But assuming Aldama's there, you could take that lottery pick wherever you land, and instead of saying to yourself, we probably need to draft a big, like I've been clamoring for, fee, fi, fo, fum, right? I'm still on that wagon, but Nick Richards would check that box. And you probably don't need to give up the 6th or 7th or 8th overall pick in the 2024 NBA draft to get Nick Richards. The guy that I'm going to talk about here in a moment in a future first, or maybe a couple of seconds, would probably get the job done. You acquire Nick Richards, whether he starts or whether he's a backup. You check that center box at a cost-effective number. What can you do with that 6th, 7th, 8th, heaven forbid, top 4 lottery selection? You can pick the best player available. You no longer have to worry about, is Donovan Clingan the best guy on my board at 6? Take whoever you want. If it's a guard from Kentucky, go with it. If it's a wing from Tennessee, rock. Insert the name of your favorite draft darling for the Memphis Grizzlies here. You no longer have that glaring weakness. Maybe it's not the strength you would want it to be. Maybe it's not a Jalen Duren or some other big name that you think you could possibly get by trading that pick. But it does check the box and allows for you to be in a position where you have a big who can be that traditional piece, whether he starts or is a reserve. And again, if you want to add another lottery level talent to the long-term core of Ja, Dez, and Jaren, you have the possibility. So Nick Richards, average to above average big, on a nice contract that allows for you to take the best player available in the NBA lottery, no fuss, no muss. Or explore a different kind of trade if you're really interested in moving on from that. I think that's a pretty effective argument if I say so myself. But what do you think? Maybe you disagree. Again, let us know in the comments. Hit us up there. Happy to talk to you about whatever you might ponder when it comes to that particular player. I'm a big Nick Richards guy, but maybe you're not. You can let me know. All right. Coming up next here on Locked On Grizzlies, we are going to be talking about the case against Jake LaRavia. I'm kind of over it. I think you could pair Jake LaRavia with some assets and bring in a guy like a Nick Richards. We'll talk about why I feel that way next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you can transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at Robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal information. Claim is as of Q1 2024, validated by the Radius Global Market Research Group. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. The 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to United States customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member of SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, closing out the show, arguing against Jake LaRavia. Sorry, Jake. Stick with us. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, once again flying solo. No to Michael Cole. He'll be back with me on the Friday episode of the show, and we'll have plenty to discuss going into a weekend where it could be pretty significant for the Memphis Grizzlies. Desmond Bane potentially making his return to the lineup. Jaren Jackson Jr., Vince Williams Jr. could be a big contest for the Grizzlies, and goodness knows they could use another win. Again, at the end of the day, does it really matter? You could argue it doesn't, but maybe Memphis wants to get a little bit of revenge against the Oklahoma City Thunder, the team that had just blown them out the week before. It is a Saturday night home game in Memphis. So I'm sure we'll preview that with DeMichael and talk more injury updates, all those fun things on our next episode of Locked On Grizzlies. But before we get to Friday, I want to close out Thursday talking about Jake LaRavia. And I want to be fair. Jake LaRavia has had some games that have been pretty impressive of late, right? You finally see the flashes of the guy that the Grizzlies made moves for, the Grizzlies invested in with first-round draft capital. You're starting to see it, right? In flashes. And if you're an everydayer, you've heard me call just for flashes from Jake LaRavia because you've seen more at the G League level with the Memphis Hustle than you have seen with the Memphis Grizzlies. So he's given me what I've asked for, in fairness to Jake. But now, watching what he did against the Hornets and seeing his movement, even when he is putting up numbers, I am not sold on Jake LaRavia helping this team get to where they need to be. And at this stage, he looks like a piece that is not essential to what the Grizzlies are trying to be. There have been arguments about Lamar Stevens versus Luke Kennard, and those were always asinine. If you're listening or watching and you think I'm targeting you, I'm not. But I read and I watch and I listen. And to argue Lamar Stevens should be on this team and Luke Kennard should not be, I'll borrow a phrase, you don't know ball. Luke Kennard is one of the most elite three-point shooters in the history of the National Basketball Association. Lamar Stevens has been traded 3 times on a rookie contract. It's not comparable. Luke Kennard has been traded several times, but he's also, making $14 million for his very specific skill set that he's very elite at. So Luke Kennard is better than Lamar Stevens. Is Jake LaRavia better than Lamar Stevens? That's a conversation I'm willing to have with you. That is something that we could sit down across a cup of Joe, maybe a rib from a wonderful establishment in Memphis, Tennessee. A little bit of barbecue action, a little bit of sweet tea. I'll talk to you about that. Would I rather have Lamar Stevens at this stage than Jake LaRavia? I think my answer is yes. Because Lamar Stevens brings something to the table on both sides of the court that we have not seen consistently from Jake LaRavia. Now, again, in fairness and defense of Jake, this is literally his second season, right? The second time he's had a chance to play. And he has literally played in 45 games across a season and 2/3 for the Memphis Grizzlies. He's had injury issues. He's played some time down with the Memphis Hustle. He has logged maybe 700 NBA minutes, if that. So the sample size is not as big as perhaps you'd want it to be to make such a declarative statement. I'm acknowledging that. And there are signs of growth in his game, despite the shorter sample size. And a larger usage rate, according to Cleaning the Glass, he has a pretty impressive assist percentage, 74th percentile at 13.3%. LaRavia checks the defensive boxes that head coach Taylor Jenkins likes to focus on. Block percentage, steal percentage. He's above average in both of those spaces. But where I really struggle with Jake LaRavia is the way that he's been sold to the Memphis Grizzlies and their fans, the way that we have been told to perceive him is how he is as a shooter, as a scorer of the basketball. And while at times last season, again, 326 minutes played last year, really impressive score. This year, it's been abysmal. Truly abysmal. He is in the 4th percentile in effective field goal percentage, 44.3%. And again, that is about how effectively they shoot the basketball. That includes all different aspects of shooting. Jake LaRavia shoots 45% at the rim. That is 2nd percentile. He is among the very worst forwards, in the NBA, according to Cleaning the Glass, and finishing at the rim. And if you want to talk about a bigger sample size, he was just as bad at it, just about, in his rookie campaign. So he's not growing in his finishing at the basket. He's regressing. Does he have a strong mid-range game? Maybe. He's in the elite percentiles for that. But as we've seen with Zaire Williams, that doesn't necessarily translate to what Taylor Jenkins wants to do. And if we're comparing Zaire Williams to Jake LaRavia, I have seen Zaire Williams alongside Joe Morant enough that I know that A, Zaire can play next to Joe, and B, Zaire thrives in that role more often than not. Whereas, again, in fairness to Jake, we haven't seen it, but Jake does not have a game that is conducive to it from what we have seen, if that makes sense. Have we seen a ton of Jake LaRavia, Joe Morant opportunity? No, we haven't. But have I seen enough Jake LaRavia to know that his skill set, his athleticism, what he does well as a basketball player, that is not as connective to what Ja does well as it is for Zaire. He's not shooting the 3-ball well. He's at 27% there. What he is supposed to be good at, very good at, quite simply, he's not. And the Grizzlies are at a stage where they have to contend, and they have to contend now. So, my Nick Richards idea. Charlotte Hornets aren't trying to be good next year. Jake LaRavia has shown flashes. Nick Richards is certainly better than Jake LaRavia, but are the Charlotte Hornets saying no to a protected 1st-round pick in Jake LaRavia, or 2 second-round picks, including maybe number 38 in this draft this season, which is roughly where it's projected to be coming into this draft? 2 good second-round picks or a protected 1st, plus LaRavia for Nick Richards? Does Charlotte say no? I'm not sure they do, because LaRavia, again, is on a rookie contract. They would, in theory, be saving money, a couple million over the next 2 years with LaRavia as opposed to Richards. And they could go in a direction with a draft pick to bring in a different kind of big if they think that they need someone who has more shooting range. If they have they need someone that has more offensive capability as a scorer. The Grizzlies don't need that from their center. They don't. They have guys that can do those things. They need a guy that can rebound, protect the rim. Richards has shown that capacity. And if you want him to grow his game offensively, maybe he expands it as a creator of offense for others. But that would be my offer to Charlotte. Jake LaRavia, protected 1st. Jake LaRavia, 2 good seconds, including number 38-ish in this draft for Nick Richards. What say you, Charlotte Hornets? What do you think? What say you, commenters? Am I out of my mind? Should I not make that trade? Are you not impressed with Nick Richards? I think he checks a box and allows for you to keep that lottery pick and that best player available idea. maybe you disagree. Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for hanging out with me on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Remember, Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel over on YouTube, also available on Amazon TV and the free Fire app. Really cool to be a part of that, to be a part of Locked On Grizzlies, obviously, with the Locked On Podcast Network is an honor and a privilege. And I am very happy wherever you're checking us out, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get podcasts. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe. Continue to make us part of your Locked On Grizzlies, Locked On NBA, Locked On Podcasts experience. Again, on Friday, DeMichael Cole will be back with me. We will take a look at Saturday's big game against the Thunder. The reason I'm saying it's a big game is it's very possible Desmond Bane makes his return. The Grizzlies have a couple of days off, including today. Obviously, they'll probably get a practice in there somewhere. They'll probably be off today after a back-to-back, but Friday they'll practice. DeMichael may have an idea of where they'll be in terms of injuries. We'll get an update. And we'll talk about Grizzlies Thunder and look ahead to the next several games in the next several weeks as the Grizzlies close out the regular season. Again, thank you 1,000 times. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe. YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcasts. Shout out to you, my everydayer. Hopefully you'll be back with us tomorrow. Until then, I'm Joe Mullinax. Stay locked in. This is Locked On Grizzlies.